Hello everyone, my name is Carlo Pavan. I am a singer and actor / freelance artist / blogger. I was born in Rome, hence my Italian accent, but I've been living in London for the past 7 years. I want to welcome you to this digital version of my workshop Creative Journaling for Mindfulness. By the word mindfulness, we mean an attitude of concentration and attention to the present moment. An attitude that we can develop and cultivate thanks to meditation or similar activities, in this case, keeping a creative diary. I've always been passionate about artistic techniques, and since I was a child, I've always written a lot, filling up pages of notebooks and online blogs. Writing a personal diary helped me a lot in different times of my life, especially when my mental health was not at its best. In recent years, I studied and collected several artistic techniques and developed a workshop that combines the creative process of scrapbooking with the concept of journaling to discover the benefits that these two activities combined together can give us if, for example, we suffer from anxiety or depressive states. The creative diary as a tool to improve our mental health. It sounds good. This is what I'm going to show you in this workshop, at the end of which you will not only be able to create an artistic product, and you will have learned different interesting techniques to use without limits, but you will see how by becoming the master of the creative process, you can actually become the master of your mental well-being. Are you ready to start? Okay, so basic materials. The most important thing that we need is, of course, a brand new notebook. My suggestion is to use a hardcover notebook because it's more resistant, with completely white pages, therefore no lines or grids. But if you need to have references, for example, if you want to draw precise lines or you want to insert grids or graphs in your diary, a good option would be to buy a dotted notebook, also called a bullet journal, which will make the tracing of your grids much simpler. Having to work with paper, it's important that the paper is a good quality one, or at least it's thick enough to support glue and color without engulfing too much. If I can suggest a couple of brands to look for, I would say Moleskine or Leuchtturm. Another good choice is to use, instead of a normal notebook, a sketchbook or a sketch pad with pages of a weight of at least 90-100 GSM. Of course, these are the top suggestions, but you can really use any notebooks that you want, even a prompted diary. Why not? Now we need more materials. Let's start from something that we can find normally at home. So, for example, some glue stick, a pair of scissors, and some PVA glue. And then colored pencils, pens, markers, crayons. Also, we will use materials that we can easily buy, even online, at a reasonable price. A set of brushes, a small watercolor kit. It doesn't need to be super professional. A jar of acrylic gesso. Acrylic gesso is a paste made of white plaster and acrylic resin. It's the material normally used to prepare and prime canvases for painting. We will need stamps and ink pads, in particular one brown and one black. Washi tapes. They are decorated paper masking tapes. You can find lots of them on Amazon or Etsy. I especially like those with vintage decorations or inspired by maps and old postcards. Our creative diary uses the collage technique merged with the scrapbooking technique. So the last great element that we need is the scraps of paper. And that's where your creativity has to go wild. Go searching for different kinds of paper with different types of grain, opacity, color. Get some old dusty books, postcards, stamps, tea bags, paper bags from the market, old greeting cards. Look for botanical illustrations, vintage photographs, labels, expired tickets, road maps. Cut out some images from newspapers or magazines. Not just images, phrases, poems, pieces of text. For my creative diary, I went for a vintage and travel-inspired style. So I started collecting vintage elements, especially the so-called ephemera. Cards, postcards, everything that was originally expected to have an interest and use for a limited time. You can find many ephemera and vintage images online, which you can download and print the size that you need. So far we've been talking about items that you can find and collect. But now I want to show you some elements that you can create yourself and that will be a personal and precious addition to your diary. For example, let's see how we can create a vintage effect on paper starting from the pages of an old book. I'm going to show you different methods with different effects. The first one is very simple. What we need is the pages of an old book, a spray bottle like this one, and a hairdryer. First, let's prepare a strong coffee. Wait for it to cool down and pour it into the bottle. Let's cover the working surface with some cardboard or plastic to avoid stains on the table. At this point, we place the pages to be treated on the worktop and we start spraying the coffee in a fairly free way. Then we can dry the page with the help of the hairdryer. It is possible to repeat the operation more and more times for a stronger effect. Another idea could be to simulate the classic mark of the coffee cup. Visually very interesting. The smell of coffee is quite strong, but if you prefer a more subtle alternative, you can try with a very concentrated black tea. In that case, you will need more and more applications to reach a stronger effect. We can work furtherly on the page, for example with a black or brown ink pad, simply tapping the edges of the page. Or using a sponge to create stains. To make our page even more interesting, we can work with stamps, or draw something, or write quotes or phrases. In this workshop, you will find that there are no rules, only techniques to apply. Aside from that, the creative process is the most free and personal thing that we can have. Going back to the vintage effects on the paper, it's time to prepare some waxed paper to obtain this particular translucent effect. What we need is again the pages of an old book or any images that we can print on paper. Then we need some parchment baking paper, a little tea light candle like this one, and our hairdryer. We start cutting a rectangle of parchment paper and we fold it in half. We place the paper to wax near the fold, and we take the candle and a knife. We begin to scratch the candle with the knife, scattering the wax filings on our paper. When we got enough, we fold the baking paper so it covers the pages. At this point, we direct the hairdryer perpendicularly to the table. The wax will start to melt, and we can work it manually to cover the paper below. When the wax is melted, we let it cool down for a minute. We unfold the parchment paper and we remove the excess wax from the pages. When the pages have cooled completely, we will have reached this translucent effect. Very interesting when we want to play combining different papers with different opacity. Once treated with wax, the paper can be wrinkled or folded, creating this kind of effect. If you don't have a candle in the house, you can get the translucent effect by applying some vegetable oil on the paper with a brush. Absorbing the excess with kitchen towel, and letting the paper dry for a few minutes. We continue this assortment of paper things created by us with these vintage luggage tags. They have the shape of those that were once used to indicate the owner of a suitcase. We can reimagine them in an artistic way and use them to decorate our creative diary or our scrapbook, or also to embellish a gift. The possibilities are endless. What we need is a white card or light brown, a collection of vintage images that we found and cut out, parts of text from an old book, and the acrylic gesso with a hard brush. If you don't have the acrylic gesso, you can use Mod Podge or a simple PVA glue diluted with some water. The effect will be slightly different, but it will do the job. Place your white card on the worktop. Start ripping and combining our paper scraps on the surface. Overlap them. Play with them a little. With the help of a brush, we can now begin to glue the cutouts on the cardboard using the acrylic gesso. Coating the top surface as well, in order to seal it. The acrylic gesso is white, so you will need to remove the excess with a cloth to keep the images visible. The result will be this opaque clouded effect, which we won't have if we use the PVA glue, which will be entirely transparent once dry. Play with the portions of text, ripping out words, quotes, and overlapping them to the pictures. Let everything dry, or if you are in a hurry, you can use your hairdryer. When it's dry, draw on the card the outlines of the tags, using one as a reference in case you have it. If you don't have a tag to use as a reference, it's very easy to create one. Make a rectangle. Cut the upper corners diagonally and round the lower corners. Easy, isn't it? Once we cut the tags, we can give them some color effects. With a brown ink pad, we tap the edges of the label to give an almost burnt effect. With our set of watercolors, we apply some diluted color, this way, freely, on the tags. We then wet the tip of the brush. We tap it in the black or brown watercolor and we flick random dots on the surface. Now, with the hole puncher, we just have to create a hole in the center, on the top. And this is the final result. As I said, there are 1,000 possible uses for this kind of tags. And you can also use this technique to create handmade bookmarks, simply cutting a longer and narrower rectangular shape. Going back for a moment to the concept of diary, I want to show you how we can take pages of an old book and turn them into pages where to write our thoughts in a very interesting way. This time, the acrylic gesso will be fundamental. All we have to do is apply a thin layer of gesso on the page, hiding parts of text, and creating empty spaces that will then accommodate our writing. With a cloth or some kitchen paper, we remove the excess, creating some portions of space in which the underlying text can be more or less visible. We can add items to the page, such as fragments of different paper. One idea could be to create a central white space enclosed by a decorated external frame. We can prepare several pages to keep in our collection of paper ready to be used. We will see how shortly. My suggestion is to keep your collection of paper, stickers, ephemera and items of your creation in an expandable folder such as this one, which has a very handy size, so you can take it with you even when you're traveling. This allows you to catalog the different elements, so you can find them easily when you look for them. Cool! We are now ready to work on our diary. When we start a new notebook, there's always a little bit of hesitation, due to the fact that the first blank page can be a little bit intimidating. The creative diary is an exercise of freedom, and the first page block is the first pressure that we want to get rid of. So we're gonna skip it. We just move on. We can come back to it whenever we want. Even at the end, it's not important. What is important is to start thinking about our diary, not as a single page, but as two open pages, two spaces that communicate and become a unique canvas, what we would call the journal spread. It may seem like a minor detail, but it's not, because psychologically we've already overcome one limitation, which is the limitation of the single page. And this will make it easier to overcome other limits and exercise our creativity freely. So let's start to visually compose our spread, gluing and combining various elements until we reach a result that satisfies us. Don't think of your paper scraps as something finished and to use as it is, but always feel free to rip them, crumple them, and always turn what you have into something else. The portion of space that we are going to decorate is called positive space, whereas the space where we are gonna write our thoughts is called negative space, but we will call it blank space, which sounds a little bit happier. While composing our positive space, try to combine different types of paper, overlapping elements, playing with the opacity of them. I want to give you some tips on how to visually structure your spread that can be useful, especially if you're a beginner. And I'm gonna do it showing you some of the spreads that I made recently. In the first example, I concentrated the positive space along the outer edges, leaving all the central area blank. Here I decided instead to decorate the upper and lower corners of the spread, like I wanted to put the central text between air quotes. Of course, you can reverse things, as I did here. Use the communication between the two pages as much as possible. For example, by placing elements in the middle, in order to expand the creative horizon. Do you remember the pages of the old book that we altered earlier? Well, with these pages we can start a process that we would call wallpapering. We can glue an altered page on one of the two pages of the spread. We then add more elements. And we try to unify the spread so that we perceive it as one single space. At this point, we will have many blank spaces on which we can write freely. It's important not to think of our creative diary as something necessarily bidimensional. For example, we can create and play with different layers. Or we can add dynamic elements, such as envelopes or little pockets, where we can collect or hide other items. It's time to talk about the written element of your diary. Before dealing with the content, we will take a look at the text form and the technical equipment. While you write your diary, it's not important to make it look good at all costs. It doesn't matter if your handwriting is not aesthetically pleasant as the examples that you can find on Pinterest or Instagram. That's not the purpose of your diary. Your diary must speak about you. It must reflect your way of being, thinking, creating, and therefore also your way of writing, with all the human imperfections of the case. The creative space is a space free from judgment and prejudice. Start by using a fine-tip gel pen. For example, these Muji fine liners 0.5 or 0.38. They perform very well on paper. As well as the Uniball pens or the Stabilo Point 88 fine liners, which have different colors and they don't bleed on the page underneath. Experiment alternating and combining colors, pen types, ballpoint, fountain pen, with different sizes and shapes of the tip, as you can see in these examples from Instagram. Feel free to change the orientation of the page, magnifying important words or portion of text so that they stand out better on the page. Or even try new calligraphies, without forgetting your own one. Another important thing to remember to get rid of unnecessary pressure is that we don't have to write much. We don't always have pages and pages of things to talk about. And that's absolutely normal, and it should not prevent us from journaling. Sometimes just a sentence that describes how we feel at that moment is enough. Or again, we can write quotes, copy the parts of a book that we liked, the lyrics of a song. No matter if they are not our words, the fact that we have chosen them means that they resonate with us, and therefore they have the right to be in our diary. They also represent our truth. The fundamental thing in this process of writing, as in the creative process in general, is to be 100% true and honest with ourselves and with what we create. The creative space is our most intimate and personal space, and the more honest and sincere we can be, the freer we can create and grow, evolve. There are many uses for our creative diary to improve our mental health, especially if we suffer from anxiety, panic attacks or depression. One exercise I always recommend in particular is to write a list of your worries. On a day that you feel particularly anxious, dedicate an hour to your diary. Put on some music that helps you concentrate and relax. On YouTube, you can find videos with sounds of nature, ocean waves. Create a spread with no rush. Take your time. Savor the creative moment. When the spread is ready, write a list of all the things that you are currently worried about, whether they are small or big worries, all the things that give you anxiety. Recognize them and write them down, compiling a list. Don't rush, but try to list them all, separating them by bullet points. When you're finished, raise your eyes from the worktop, close them, and take a breath. Breathe in and breathe out slowly. Make a big smile for yourself, and then look at your work. When worries and anxieties accumulate in our heads, they tend to merge one into each other, becoming a single block. And at that point we are overwhelmed because we can no longer see the contours. We do not isolate them, so we don't know how to deal with them. Making a list, we put them on paper. They are no longer in the abstract space of our head, but we see them on the white page. They finally have a size, and some of them will appear smaller and less important than we thought. They are separated by points, so they have a well-defined outline, and we can deal with them better. For example, we can understand which of them are things that we can actually control or change, and which ones are irrationals or don't depend on us. But above all, having used our concerns for an artistic creation exercise, we have actually taken something negative and turned it into a positive force. Believe me, it works. Another suggestion to combine our diary and our mental well-being comes from the practice of the bullet journal, an activity that became very popular a few years ago. The bullet journal often uses trackers, which are grids that help us record and keep track of certain elements connected with our general health. You can, for example, write down your mood every day. Always do it creatively, using drawings or colors. You can track your physical activity, the amount of water you drink. If you are trying to lose a bad habit or build a new one, you can record your progress. Many people find it useful and effective to set daily or weekly goals and put a cross next to those that they reach. It's certainly a motivation and an incentive for productivity, as long as it doesn't put on us too much pressure or give us more anxiety. In that case, it's a better idea to write on our diary daily the things we accomplish and the goals we achieve, but to write them down only once we have achieved them. A practical example comes from the recent COVID-19 emergency. We have all been forced to stay at home. And speaking from a personal experience, at first I tried to be productive at all costs, setting daily goals to achieve, in order not to feel that I was wasting my time. Which is fine, but soon I realized that I was putting a lot of pressure on myself, and that it was absolutely normal to slow down, stop for a moment, and that these were, and they still are, strange times that can disorient, without a doubt. I realized that for my mental well-being, even more important than being at all costs productive, was rather not to feel like I was living the same day over and over. So I stopped making lists of goals with boxes to tick, and instead I started writing every day what I had done, trying every day to be creative, to vary, to explore new things. My main goal was to fill the blank page with new things. I made my day a creative space, and every day was a new day. Keeping a creative diary is an exercise in well-being that becomes a gift we give ourselves while we create it and after. Because when we finish writing and creating the last page, we will have in our hands a moment of our life, an object that speaks about us and the times that we have lived, our personal work of art, through which we will have grown and we will have evolved creatively. An analog memory that we can touch and browse. In these times when memories, photographs and moments are always entrusted to the digital, to Facebook, to patterns and templates that others choose for us, standardized and impersonal. The creative diary is a here and now that tells our story better than any social media.